All right, everyone, the purpose of this video is to set you up for success on your Emancipation in the North Summative coming up during your next class. Let's take a look at the exact summative that you're going to see during your next class. The directions say, someone just said to you, the North was free before the Civil War started in 1861. How would you respond? Your response must be at least one complete sentence in length. Your response must use 3 pieces of evidence from at least 2 of the sources we have read in class: American Slavery Book Excerpt, Map of the Spread of U.S. Slavery, New England Colonies' Use of Slavery, and the New York, Pennsylvania, and Vermont abolition laws. Your response must provide the name of each source that you used, and your response must explain how each piece of evidence you used backs up your point about slavery in the North in at least one complete sentence. So when you go to take this test, you are going to be provided with copies of everything that you have read over the past few days in U.S. history. You're going to get the excerpt of the American Slavery book that you read. You're going to see pictures from the map that you went to online. You're going to get the same section of New England Colonies' Use of Slavery that you saw in class. And then lastly, you're going to see all 3 of the state abolition laws that you looked at in class. So you'll have copies of all of these things to use during the test. Below the directions are a rubric that shows you how to get a 100 on this test. I want us to look together at how we're going to get a 4 in every section. To get a 4, you need to answer the question in at least one complete sentence. You need to use at least 2 of the sources that we read in class. So we have 4 sources. You need to use at least 2 of them. You need to provide the name of all of the sources that you used. You need to use at least 3 pieces of evidence. So you're only required to use 2 sources, but you need to have 3 pieces of evidence. So for some of you, that could end up looking like you using 3 sources with a different piece of evidence from each, or you could end up using 2 different sources with 2 pieces of evidence from one and 1 piece of evidence from the second. Your evidence needs to actually support what you're saying. So if you're telling me that the North wasn't free, all 3 pieces of evidence need to show me reasons why the North was not free. And then you need to sufficiently explain how your evidence shows your point. So here is where you'll do the writing. You'll write your response to whether or not the North was free here. Then you'll provide the name of your source, a quote from your source or a description from your source here, and then your explanation. Name of source, quote, explanation, name of source, quote, explanation. So to help illustrate this point, we are going to look at basically the exact same thing, except instead of looking at Emancipation in the North, we are now concerned with whether or not Stranger Things is the best series on Netflix. So for the next few examples, we are going to pretend that someone just said to you, Stranger Things is the best series that Netflix ever produced, and we're going to see how you respond to that. I have an example of 4 different responses, some of which are pretty good, some of which need some work. And what we're going to do together is we're going to figure out how to score it using the exact same rubric that you're going to be scored on your summative, so you know exactly how you're going to be scored. So the first thing we're looking for when we're scoring is the answer to the question. Here's our first one. Stranger Things definitely isn't the best series Netflix ever produced, is this student's answer. That is at least 1 complete sentence in length. So the student is getting a 4 for that. The next thing we're looking for is the amount of resources used and whether they provided the name of the source. So let's see, name of source. I have a name of source. They use the 10 biggest problems with Stranger Things. Name of source, the 10 biggest problems with Stranger Things. Okay, so I've used the same source twice, which means I'm going to need a different source for the third one. And we have the 10 biggest problems with Stranger Things. So this student uses evidence from at least two of the sources. Nope. Uses evidence from one source we used. Yes. So they scored a 3 for that because they used the same source every single time and they needed to use at least two sources. But did they provide the name of the source all 3 times? You betcha they did. So we're going to give them credit for that. That is a 4. Did they give us 3 pieces of evidence? Certainly looked like it. Let's see, I've got a quote here from the source. I've got a quote here from the source. And I've got a quote here from the source. Yep, I've got 3 pieces of evidence. Now we need to get in more into the nitty-gritty. Is the evidence quality and is the explanation quality? So again, they are arguing that Stranger Things isn't the best series Netflix ever produced. The first quote says, "Viewers have been getting tired of Eleven showing up and saving the rest of the cast. This evidence shows how every season of Stranger Things has basically ended the same way. So it definitely isn't Netflix's best series." Well, yeah, that sounds really boring if they have this every season ending the exact same way with 11 showing up and saving the day. So far, this quote and this explanation seems like a really quality way of backing up that Stranger Things isn't the best series. On to the next one. The cast of Stranger Things has outgrown their characters and now look older than the characters they're playing. This quote illustrates how the cast of Stranger Things is not realistic, so it can't be the best show on Netflix. All right, so there's issues with the casting, both of which support that Stranger Things is not the best series. So far, so good. Next quote. There's never a risk of a main character dying. This show loses its drama when the audience doesn't have to worry about the safety of main characters, so it is not the best show on Netflix. Yet another piece of evidence and student explanation showing that Stranger Things isn't the best series that Netflix has produced. So all of those pieces of evidence and all of those explanations are solid. So this student just lost 1 point. They scored a 23 out of 24. For these next ones, we're going to walk through the student work, but it's going to be your job to score them here in this ed puzzle. All right, you're doing the scoring now. Your first job is to tell me whether the answer is at least one complete sentence in length, whether it is not a complete sentence, or whether there is no answer or a completely unrelated answer. The answer is Stranger Things definitely isn't the best series Netflix ever produced. Do you think that the students scored a 4, a 3, or a 2? If you said 4, I agree with you entirely. Our next job, we're going to look at the amount of resources used and whether they provided the name of each. So source 1, the 10 biggest problems with Stranger Things. Source 2, the 10 biggest problems with Stranger Things. Source 3, Netflix most streamed shows of all time. Did they use at least 2 of the resources listed here? Did they use at least 1 of the resources listed there? Or did they use none of the resources? How would you score this person for the amount of resources that they used? Yep, they used 2 of those sources. They used the first 2 in that list, so they got full credit. Did they provide us the name each time? Again, here's number 3, here's number 2, and here's number 1. Did they give us the name each time? Yes, they did, so they score a 4. Were there 3 pieces of evidence, 2 pieces of evidence, or 1 piece of evidence? Quote, quote, quote. Yep, we have 3 pieces of evidence, so they scored a 4. Now we're looking at the quality of the evidence and the quality of the explanations. Do the evidences and the explanations both support their idea that Stranger Things isn't the best series Netflix ever produced? We have viewers have been getting tired of Eleven showing up and saving the lives of the rest of the cast. This evidence shows how every season of Stranger Things has basically ended the same way, so it definitely isn't Netflix's best series. We have the cast of Stranger Things has outgrown their characters and now look older than the characters they're playing. This quote illustrates how the cast of Stranger Things is not realistic, so it can't be the best show on Netflix. And lastly, we have Squid Game has 1.65 billion streaming hours. Stranger Things only has 1.35 billion streaming hours. The fact that Squid Game has been streamed more than Stranger Things shows that Squid Game is the better show. So first, we're just thinking about the evidence. Do all 3 pieces of evidence that were provided support the idea that Stranger Things is not the best show? Does the evidence mostly support that this student's answer that Netflix is not the best show? Or does the evidence not support the answer at all? If you scored this student with a 4, I agree with you. I think all of their evidence really beautifully supports that Stranger Things is not the best show. What about the explanation? Do all of those explanations support the student's answer in at least one complete sentence? Do the answers support the answer but not in complete sentences? Or are we missing good support entirely? Yeah, I think this student scored a 4 here as well, which means that this one was a perfect 24 out of 24. This is a 100%. That's what a 100% will look like on your test. Let's keep looking at some more examples. All right, on to our third student's response. Right now, we're focusing on the answer to the question and whether it is at least one complete sentence in length and related to the question that was asked. Your friend just said Stranger Things is the best series that Netflix ever produced. How would you respond? This person said, I like pineapples. What do we think? Do they score a 4, a 3, or a 2? Yep, this is a definite 2. I don't know what their love of pineapples has to do with Stranger Things. That's not super related in my mind. Now let's look at the amount of resources that they used and whether they named the source each time. So evidence number 1 came from Stranger Things Season 1, Rotten Tomatoes. Evidence number 2 was left blank. Evidence number 3 was left blank. Okay, so if we look at our rubric, did they use 2 sources and score a 4, 1 source and score a 3, or no sources and score a 2? Yep, they used 1 source, so they get a 3. Did they provide a name of their sources? They provided a name for all 3, they provided a name for 2, or they provided a name for 1 or none. They provided a name for 1, so they're going to get a 2 for that. How about the amount of evidence? Did they have one piece of evidence, two pieces of evidence, or three pieces of evidence? They only had one piece of evidence, so they're going to score a 2. Let's see if their evidence supports their answer and whether the explanation is good. So their answer again was I like pineapples. Their evidence said season 1 scored a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. We don't have an explanation. So quality of evidence, the evidence selected successfully supports the student's answer, the evidence selected mostly supports the student's answer, or the evidence selected does not support the student's answer. I could understand if you scored this as a 2. I'm going to be a little bit easy on them. I'm going to give them a 3 because they did select evidence that's kind of pertaining to the topic, even though their answer has nothing to do with the topic. So I'm going to try to give them some points. What about explanations? As a reminder, here's what our explanation looked like. Yeah, the student's getting a 2 here because we did not have explanations at all. All right, so there's kind of a look at what not to do. Let's take a look at one last student piece of work.